Hi everyone, this is Dr. Kingston, and in this video we're going to be covering the parasympathetic nervous system. To do this, we are going to be discussing how that parasympathetic nervous system is structured. We're going to discuss how parasympathetics travel within the head and neck to reach their targets, and we'll talk about the four ganglia that are associated with parasympathetics. We're going to start off with a very quick review of the peripheral nervous system and its components. So recall that the central nervous system is made up of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system then is all of the nerves branching off of them. The peripheral nervous system has two separate components that each follow their own pathways. So there's the somatic nervous system. And again, somatic comes from the Latin stem soma, which means body. But in anatomy, this is specifically referring to the external body wall, the limbs, and the head, to the exclusion of our deeper viscera, so the organs of the thorax and abdomen. Right? This is the part of our bodies that we are typically conscious of. So skin, joints, striated muscles that we activate to move around. Now, the viscera, our internal organs, those are served by the autonomic nervous system. We're not typically very aware of what's going on inside of us, unless something's going really wrong. So it's fair to categorize the autonomic system as being in charge of unconscious functions that involve smooth muscle and glands. Now, not only are these in charge of different structures, they're also different in their makeup. The somatic nervous system out in the periphery consists of one neuron with its cell body located in the central nervous system, okay? So they're like a little root. And then that axon travels all the way out to its target structure. The autonomic nervous system consists of a two-neuron pathway. So one of these neurons has its body in the central nervous system, and it synapses with a second out in the periphery. Neuron cell bodies don't like to just hang out on their own. So in the central nervous system, we see them grouping together as nuclei or as gray matter, right? Out in the periphery, we see something similar. So we end up having these bulbous structures made up of different cell bodies here, grouped together, called ganglia, or a ganglion if we're talking just about one of them. So these can exist as kind of a dissectable, semi-individual structure that has connections to one or more peripheral nerves, like you see here in this middle example. Or these can exist within the parenchyma of an organ, so within the organ's tissue, like you see down here on the bottom. The defining feature of a ganglion is having multiple cell bodies clustered together out in the periphery. So both of these fit that definition. The important thing to remember about a ganglion is that because we've got cell bodies here, this is where that synapse between our first neuron in the autonomic chain and the second is going to take place. Now, to spice things up a little more even, the autonomic nervous system has two divisions. There's the sympathetic nervous system, which originates in the spinal cord and is really best thought of as the flight or fight system. And then there is the parasympathetic nervous system, which has its origins both in the brain and spinal cord. So para means around. The sympathetic is right in the middle in the spinal cord in the thoracolumbar region. Parasympathetic sits at either end of that. And it is typically antagonistic to the sympathetic nervous system. So its functions are going to be best remembered by the phrase rest and digest. We're going to set sympathetics to one side for right now, and we'll pick it back up later once we get down into the spinal cord. And for the rest of this video, we're just going to focus in on parasympathetics. All right, so as I was saying, parasympathetics can be thought of as the rest and digest system. What that means, practically speaking, is that this system tells the viscera to do things that either minimize energy expenditure, so that's the rest part, or to bring in new sources of energy, and that's the digest. Some examples of this are slowing down the heart rate, constricting the bronchi to reduce ventilation and reduce oxygen intake, stimulating both the chemical and mechanical parts of digestion, constricting the pupils to allow in less light, and increasing exocrine gland secretion. And that is going to include all of the salivary glands. So let's delve a little bit more into the structure of the parasympathetic nervous system. So first thing first, we're going to give this first red neuron here a name. It's not a very creative name. It's just the preganglionic neuron because it is before that ganglion. This is our buddy who is rooted back here in the central nervous system. And because we're talking about parasympathetics, we can safely say this is either somewhere in the brainstem or in the sacral spinal cord. Excuse me. When we talk about parasympathetic pathways, it is important to realize that they look different depending upon what structures they're targeting. Specifically, for the purposes of this head and neck anatomy class, I am going to focus very heavily on the pathway for head and neck structures. That is going to look slightly different from the pathway for abdominopelvic viscera. Okay, so all of our organs down in our thorax and abdomen here. I am going to do my best to give you a complete accounting of how these nerves travel around, but my focus is very much going to be on head and neck structures, and that's where your focus should be as well. All right. So we've named our preganglionic neurons. Now let's talk a little bit about them and where different parts of them are found. So their cell bodies, as we said, are located in the central nervous system. And we're going to narrow that down because they're parasympathetics and have craniosacral outflow. We're going to say these are going to be some originating in the cranium, specifically in the brainstem, and others down in the sacral spinal cord. All right. Preganglionic neurons heading for all head and neck structures are going to be starting up in the brainstem, along with some that target thoracic and abdominal organs. The sacral spinal cord is mainly the origin for pelvic innervation. Okay? So because we have two origins for parasympathetics, okay, so starting in brainstem and sacral spinal cord, we have two corresponding pathways that are then going to take those preganglionic axons out of the central nervous system and into the periphery. So preganglionic neurons that start off in the brainstem, all of our head and neck stuff, are going to head out traveling on cranial nerves, every single one of them, okay? Everything starting out in the sacral spinal cord leaves via the pelvic splanchnics. All right, and as I said, the cranial nerves are going to serve parasympathetic structures in the head and neck. Some of these will also extend down into the thorax and abdomen, and then the pelvic splanchnic nerves are going to supply the pelvis and maybe some of the very lowest parts of the abdomen. All right, so I want you to notice on this image before I move on that all parasympathetics to the head and to the neck are going to come out on one of four cranial nerves here. And each one of these has a specific ganglion attached to them. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about what those are. And unfortunately, this image is a little bit small and difficult to read, so I'm just going to pop these names up in text for you over on the left. So let's walk through these. We're going to start with the oculomotor nerve, which is carrying preganglionic parasympathetic fibers that will target structures in the eye. So we are talking about this nerve right here. This synapse is in the ciliary ganglion, and then postganglionic fibers travel out to the eye. The facial nerve carries preganglionic parasympathetics actually headed to a couple of different structures. So cranial nerve 7 is right here. Facial nerve. We have one branch that heads up to the pterygopalatine ganglion and will eventually serve the lacrimal gland, and a second branch here that is going to synapse in the submandibular ganglion and eventually target some of our salivary glands. The glossopharyngeal nerve is this one down here. It's cranial nerve number 9, is associated with the otic ganglion and will eventually serve another one of the salivary glands. Now, the parasympathetics traveling with vagus are a little bit different in that they don't have a big dissectable ganglion, but these are the ones that have a number of small little ganglia located in the walls of these organs. So while vagus is a cranial nerve, and while it does carry preganglionic parasympathetics, these are all headed down to thoracic and abdominal organs. All right, so that is as much as we are going to say about vagus. All right, so we have the first portion of the pathway outlined for most of our head and neck structures here already. We've got our preganglionic neuron, which has its cell body in the central nervous system and its axon traveling out along a cranial nerve and gets to a ganglion. Once it makes it to this ganglion, it finds its buddy to synapse with. Now, very uncreatively, once again, we're going to call this buddy the postganglionic or postsynaptic neuron. And that is what's going to travel the rest of the way out to the target structures. Now, the one aspect of parasympathetic pathways that tends to confuse more people than anything else is how that postganglionic axon then travels to its target once it leaves the ganglion. Because it's not as simple as just jumping back on the same cranial nerve that the preganglionic neuron traveled with. Instead, that postganglionic axon leaves the ganglion and it tends to run with or hitchhike with branches of completely separate cranial nerves. Now, we say hitchhike instead of join because they don't really become part of the nerve. They don't share its connective tissues or mix in with the other fibers, but they do run pressed up right along next to them, okay? And I will clarify to say that is typically postganglionic fibers that hitchhike, but in one instance, some of the preganglionic fibers do this as well. So what nerves are these hitchhikers traveling with and why do they pick them? Well, typically they run with branches of the trigeminal nerve. And this is because trigeminal branches go literally everywhere in the head. So remember that the trigeminal nerve provides somatic sensory innervation to the face and most of the head. Anywhere that you touch on your base has a branch of the trigeminal nerve serving it. So jumping on branches of that trigeminal nerve ensures that those parasympathetics can get anywhere they need to go, okay? Now, which branch of the trigeminal individual fibers coming off of individual ganglia jump on, we will spell out for you as we get to those specific areas. For right now, I am very happy if you understand the concept that these are going to leave the ganglion and jump on a branch of the trigeminal nerve. So that brings us to the end of the parasympathetic pathway and to the end of the material. So here is your review question. Which of these nerves carries the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers that synapse in the submandibular ganglion? All right, the correct answer here was A, the facial nerve. And the facial nerve is the one that has two ganglia associated with both the submandibular and the pterygopalatine. So if you have not started associating these in your studies yet, it's a very good way to proceed. All right. Thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you next time.